Hello on this Monday, everyone. We are in A Child's History of the World, chapter 53. The title is A Great Adventure. Have you ever played the game called Going to Jerusalem, in which everyone scrambled to get a seat when the music stopped playing? Well, all during the Middle Ages, that is, the period between ancient times and modern times, going to Jerusalem was not a game, but a real journey which Christians everywhere in Europe wanted to take. It did take, if they could. They wanted to see the actual spot where Christ had been crucified and to pray at the Holy Sepulchre and to bring back a palm leaf as a souvenir, which they would show their friends, hang on the wall, and talk about the rest of their lives. There were always some good Christians and always some bad ones going to Jerusalem. Sometimes they went all by themselves, but more often they went with others, as of course there were no such things as trains in those days. Poor people had to walk nearly the whole way from France and from England, from Spain and from Germany. And so it took them many months and sometimes years to reach Jerusalem. These travelers were called pilgrims, and their travel was called a pilgrimage. Jerusalem at that time had been conquered by the Turks, who are Muslims. The Turks did not like these Christian pilgrims who came to see Christ's tomb, and they didn't treat them very well. Indeed, some of the pilgrims, on their return, told frightful stories of the way they had been treated by the Turks, and the way the holy place in Jerusalem were also treated. Just before the year 1100, there was a pope in Rome named Urban. Urban heard these tales that the pilgrims told, and he was shocked. He thought it was a terrible thing, anyway, for the holy city, as Jerusalem was called, and the Holy Land, where Jerusalem was located, to be ruled over by Muslims instead of by Christians. So Urban made a speech and urged all the good Christians everywhere to get together and go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, with the idea of fighting the Turks and taking the city of Jerusalem away from them. Jerusalem was a holy city for the Muslims too, as it was for the Jews. No wonder there have been so many wars to control it. Now, there lived at that time a monk whom people called Peter the Hermit. A hermit is a man who goes off and lives entirely by himself, usually in a cave or a hut, where no one can find him or go to see him, where he can spend all day in prayer. Peter the Hermit thought such a life was good for his soul, that it made him a better person to be hungry and cold and uncomfortable. Peter the Hermit had made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and was very angry at what he saw. He too began to tell people everywhere he went, how disgraceful it was for them to allow Christ's tomb to belong to Muslim rulers, and called on everyone to start on a pilgrimage with him to save Jerusalem. He talked to people in the churches, on the street corner, in the marketplace, and on the roadside. He was such a wonderful orator that those who heard him wept at his descriptions and begged to go with him. Before long, thousands upon thousands of people, old and young, men and women, and even some children, had pledged themselves to join a band to go to Jerusalem and take it away from the Muslims. As Christ had died on the cross, they cut pieces of red cloth in the form of a cross and sewed them on the front of their coats as a sign that they were soldiers of the cross. These pilgrims were called crusaders, which is the Latin word for a cross bearer. A cross bearer, somebody who carries a cross. As they knew they would be gone a long time and perhaps never return, some sold all they had and left their homes. As they knew they would be gone a long time, just went to read that one again. Some men left their wives in charge. Not only poor men, but lords and nobles and even princes joined the army of the Crusaders. And there were, besides the crowd on foot, large companies of those who rode on horseback. The plan was to start in the summer of 1096, 4 years before 1100. But a great many were so anxious to get started that they didn't wait for the time that had been set. With Peter the hermit and other pious men, and another pious man named Walter the Penniless as their leader, they started off before things were really ready. They had no idea how very far off Jerusalem was. They hadn't studied geography nor maps. They had no idea, They had no idea how long it would take, no idea how they would get food to eat on their journey, and no idea where they would sleep. They simply trusted Peter the hermit and believed that the Lord would provide everything and show them the way. Onward they marched, onward Christian soldiers, thousands upon thousands, towards the east and far off Jerusalem. Thousands upon thousands of them died from disease and from hunger on the way. Every time they came within sight of another city, they would ask, "Is this Jerusalem?" So little did they know of the long distance that still lay between them and that city. When the Muslim army in Jerusalem heard that the Crusaders were coming, they went forth to meet the Christians in order to defend their city against the European invaders. The Muslims killed almost all of the Crusaders who had started out with Peter ahead of the rest. Those Crusaders who had started out later marched on as had been planned at the beginning. Finally, after nearly 4 years, only a small band of that vast throng that had set out so long before reached the walls of the holy city. Oy vey. When at last they saw Jerusalem before them, they were wild with joy. They fell on their knees and wept and prayed and sang hymns and thanked God that he had brought them to the end of their journey. Then they furiously attacked the city. The Christians fought so hard that at last they captured Jerusalem. Then they entered the gates and killed thousands, so that it is said the streets of the holy city ran red with blood. This seems strange behavior for the followers of Christ, who preached against fighting and commanded, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword shall die by the sword." The Crusaders then made one of their leaders, named Godfrey, ruler of the city. Most of the Crusaders who were left then went back home. Some stayed, though, because they saw that they could have more land and greater riches than they had at home in Europe. And so begins the great journey of the Crusades. Well, that's it for chapter 53, y'all. Come back tomorrow for chapter 54. Ta-ta for now.